Hi, we're going to talk about agency today. Agency is a form that is not a contract, and people always get a little freaky when you meet with them the first time that you're expecting them to sign something. So, personally, if I'm meeting someone for a first time and maybe it's an internet lead, maybe it's even at an open house, I have my business card stapled with the 2 pages of agency, and I take a yellow highlighter and I highlight line 12. This is a disclosure only, not a contract for representation. So if you meet me to see a house, I am going to, at the very least, hand this to you, discuss it. If you're not comfortable signing it today, I've presented it, I did my duty, but we will sign it before we meet next time. Usually when I tell people that it's not a contract and that the Department of Commerce requires that I present this, they're fairly cooperative with that, and you look more professional. Several listing appointments, I will present this and I'll tell them we can talk about a net sheet, but not until agency is signed. It gives you the upper hand of looking more professional than the agent that came in before you. All right, so what is agency? Agency is a disclosure for Minnesota. That means we have to tell people we are licensed real estate agents, licensed brokers, what our license is. And I always tell people that there's a lot of unlicensed assistants out there, and this just differentiates us from them. That even my team, I have an unlicensed assistant, but I have to identify myself as being licensed. We acknowledge that this has been presented. This is what they're signing for. They're not agreeing to anything. They're not agreeing to a contract. They're acknowledging that this has been presented with the below described options. If I have someone that is like just, I'm not signing that, I literally will take a pen, cross through it, write declined, and have them sign that because it just shows that I presented it. Doesn't happen often, but it can. And what you're presenting is that that agency covers different types of representation. You can be a seller and have a broker represent you. The salesperson is affiliated with the broker. Some of you will work with landlords and have tenants and landlords. We're going to talk as if you're a seller. This just tells you that I have to be loyal to you. I owe you fiduciary duties, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. But if I am aware of any property that the broker is aware that could adversely affect a buyer's use or enjoyment of the property, so anything wrong with the property, I have to disclose that. You don't have to disclose it, I do. So if you're doing a disclosure alternative with a waiver, but I see 3 inches of water in the basement, I have to disclose that, and you know that because you signed agency. Buyer's tenants broker, that's a lot to say. This lets you know that you're working with a buyer. The buyer wants to know that the agent they're working with is licensed. Right now, this is not a contract. This buyer or seller would simply be a customer. They're not a client until they're under representation. This says that I owe, once again, a duty to disclose. I have to tell material facts. If I walk into a house, even if it's a first time showing it and they're a lead off the internet and I've never met them before and I see a broken window, I have to point it out. I'm not an inspector. I don't have to look for that broken window, but if I see it, I have to point it out. If I know a home is next to a landfill, I have to point it out. Anything that I think might affect someone's happiness as a material fact. Dual agency, please remember, if you're licensed and I'm your broker, and I'm the broker for the other agent, that is dual agency. If it is another Keller Williams office that we are not affiliated with, it is not dual agency. It is only dual agency if I am your broker and you're licensed out of Keller Williams Integrity Realty. To make things even more confusing, there's another Keller Williams Integrity Realty out there that we are not affiliated with. So if I'm your broker, it's a dual agency if both agents have me as their broker. This requires consent from both parties because you might have, and likely do have, confidential information that you cannot share with the other party. So I know why they're moving. I can't share that with the other party. That's a motivation. If I see something that's a material fact of the house, I still have to share that. I don't have to share the financial, net sheet of a seller with the buyer. Don't have to tell them how much they owe. Don't have to tell them their motivation to sell. Also don't have to tell the seller that maybe the buyer's really overqualified and could pay higher price. Those things are still confidential. So a buyer and seller in dual agency, they have to agree to this. Facilitator, this one gets interesting. This is an option for doing a transaction where you don't represent someone, they remain a customer, but you do all the paperwork maybe, you might even put it on the MLS. You help someone work through a property. A good example of this is a seller who already knows that Joe from work is going to buy the house and they just need someone to do the paperwork. Then you would facilitate both sides. A big thing to remember is you cannot facilitate one side and represent the other. You got to do equal. If you have a buyer that is being represented and you find a for sale by owner, there's another form for that. You can do a showing and compensation agreement. But to be a facilitator, you're either facilitating both sides or you have nothing to do with the other side. Maybe a different agent's facilitating the other side. Maybe it's an attorney facilitating the other side. Just make sure that whatever you're doing is equal to both sides. If you're not doing anything to one side, great. You do not owe fiduciary duties except confidentiality. Confidentiality goes to the grave. So if someone tells you that they're selling the house because their ex just moved out and rah, 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 that's confidential. It's not a material fact to the house. All right. Fiduciary duties. You owe loyalty, obedience, disclosure, confidentiality, reasonable care, and accounting. I try to tell people that loyalty, I have to work in your best interest, not in my best interest, not in the other party's best interest, but in the client's best interest. Obedience, if it's lawful and ethical, I have to follow your directions. If they ask me to do something that isn't one of those, isn't ethical, maybe it's a fair housing violation, I don't have to follow those directions. I have to tell them and probably cancel my contract with them. Disclosure, here again, we have to disclose to the clients all the material facts that we have knowledge of. Not secondhand, third party, I heard from the neighbor that this and that, but something that you really have information on. Confidentiality, unless it's required by law, such as material facts to a buyer, you have to keep things confidential. Please, you can't, the water cooler talk, keep it to a bare minimum. You can't do it. Reasonable care, you have to do a good job. You're in coaching to learn how to do a good job. That means filling out the forms. It means taking care of where the earnest money is, making sure someone, understands what a pre-approval letter is. Reasonable care, you have to be competent to do your job. Accounting, you're responsible for all the money and property that you receive. This typically is earnest money. Nowadays we do a lot through trust funds, super easy, but you got to make sure you do it accurately. I send back at least one purchase agreement a week because the amount on the purchase agreement does not match the amount of the trust funds receipt, and no one's double checking it. If someone does not agree to dual agency, you cannot perform dual agency. So if they say they do not want to have the same brokerage represent the buyer and the seller, you have to respect that. The last thing is notice of sexual predators. How I describe this to people is I tell them, here's a great website, here's a great phone number, you might want to call your local police department. This is information that I do not get for you. I provide the information so you can do your due diligence, but I can't promise that the information on those websites or at that phone number is going to be accurate. Someone could register at a parent's house and live at a friend's house. I can't be responsible for the information that a third party has. So I make sure you have the ability to check this yourself. Hope this made sense. Thank you.